Hello everybody, it's Jeff here. I thought I would put something out there on the spray protocol because I was involved on the group, so I thought for the Surveyors Hub I would sort of do like a first look at it and explain where the basic framework sits, because there's a lot going on at the moment with the document itself. So the first thing to remember is that this was a industry-wide working group that were brought together, facilitated by the PCA, which actually had an awful lot of breadth to it. There were people from all sorts of organisations, including the RICS, various other surveying groups as well, lender groups, the spray foam manufacturers and their association, insurance companies, legal teams, materials experts, people from accreditation boards, people were there from government departments. So it really was a very, very diverse group, and we had to try and come up with a document, and I felt it was important that it was aimed at residential surveyors, because we are the people that have to look into the roofs and come up with a reasoned decision, and there is nothing out there. So it was generally agreed that we would do a protocol based on that scenario and not on the complex issue of building pathology and the actual scientific nature in which these materials can be tested in situ. So it's a very, very specific document, and I'd like to take you through some of it now. So first of all, we're going to take a look at the basic scope of it, and you can see that it's for building professionals who are asked to consider spray polyurethane foam that has been applied to the pitched elevations of domestic roofs. So this is looking specifically at retrospective and also people undertaking a basic assessment. There are 5 basic stages which should all be familiar to you, as they really are the stepping stones of the way in which we arrive at our conclusions. So I was very keen to make sure this framework was put into the document. So the first one is recording your observations. So it's very important that we make record of what we see as a matter of fact. And so this is the very important point. You must only note down at this stage what you see as a matter of fact. So that's roof condition and things like that. So the document sets out the typical kinds of things that should be recording. And what is interesting and very important to note is that these must be just matters of fact. You should not be guessing at this stage. The second stage is to make sure that you can demonstrate sufficient knowledge. This is always one of the more complicated bits, but obviously with duty of care you need to be showing what knowledge you've got, and this was agreed amongst the working group that many different groups and institutions would be raising all sorts of different types of information for various different members of their own societies, and so there should be plenty of scope there for people to produce plenty of information for you to be able to read around. And the thing to be aware of here is really that everybody's hinging things on the BBA certificates and the KIWA certificates, which is the other accreditation certification thing. So these are 2 very, very important documents that people are hinging all these opinions on. But there will be other documents that are produced by many other people, and so it is really worth making sure you do read around, particularly on the different forms of insulation, foam insulation, and basically how moisture vapor moves through materials. It was very important that in the protocol that we made a space for surveyors to state their assumptions. We use assumptions an awful lot in surveying. So for example, if you only see one section of the roof, you assume that the rest is already coated or not. And this is very important when you come to make decisions. Now, this isn't something you necessarily need to write down in the survey itself, although it would be recommended that you do that, and that you make sure that your assumptions are reasonable, measured and justifiable. So don't forget, we're working towards a reasoned conclusion, and if you are happy with the assumptions that you've made, then this can be taken into consideration. section, the evidence section, this is where you describe what it was you were looking for. So again, this is standard practice to establish your knowledge of what you assume could go wrong and what the risks might be, and how you went about looking for evidence that would lead you down a trail. So part of that evidence is going to be important, is not only your visual evidence, but also the documented evidence. And this is going to be key in your decisions. So documentation is going to be a very, very key part of your evidence collection. And it's very important, again, that you stick to the facts in relation to this. Finally, there is the last two sections, which is opinions and conclusions. And in my opinion, these are the two most important sections that we need to consider, because they need to be separate. There are many, many people that have lots of different opinions out there, and that is one thing. But when you come to write a conclusion in an official document like a survey, you need to demonstrate that you've made a reasoned conclusion. And that is why the framework has been set up, so that you can demonstrate that. Now, obviously, if you have an opinion, then that is fine, but you must state it as an opinion. And it's probably wise then to explain why, what sort of experience you've got, what kind of evidence you've seen that may be circumstantial, or that the fact that you took a look at the roof and that you found no evidence of any ongoing defects at the time. And that's all perfectly valid. Obviously, you don't have to say anything at all, but be very, very careful. Do not put your opinion in the conclusion. In the conclusion, you really need to state how you've arrived at where you have come from, and that you have shown that you have done evidence, that you've got knowledge, that you've made assumptions, and that you've made it clear that because of all that evidence, you have drawn a conclusion. And that would either be that there's not enough evidence to suggest that this is going to perform going forward, and therefore further investigations are required, or that all the documentation and all the assumptions and all the knowledge all lined up, and that no other action is needed. And those are the two basic ones. Now, obviously, we can all argue about what is appropriate and what isn't, but it is really going to come down to documentation at the end of the day, unless you've got very, very specific knowledge. And the other thing is obviously who you hand it on to do the rest of the work, which is actually quite complicated work to undertake. So we need to make sure that we can hand on what we would want to see in terms of the documentation and proof that it was installed to the BBA certificate by another professional. So that was my very, very quick look through the document, just to give you a flavour of how it was formed and what it really is. It is really the combined thoughts of a working group. There was no real one institutional body that has framed it. The PCA facilitated it. Everybody can present it in their own way, and it was agreed that this could be done as long as no wording was actually changed. So you may see various different iterations of this coming out, but it should not be any different. So my advice really is make sure you do read widely, particularly try and get hold of as many BBA certificates and KIWA certificates as you can. Familiarise yourself or get your staff familiarised with the different types of foam. Make sure that within your company you derive and develop reasoned conclusion statements, and make sure everybody is trained up to the line of thinking for all that. And obviously liaise with your lending panels, because they have also come up with a variety of different conclusions. They all have different views. So I hope that's helped you all with where we stand at the moment. I will probably do another one with perhaps a little bit more detail on each of the sections, so that you can sort of see where it comes from. But I hope that helps you understand where the document has come from and what it means to residential surveyors undertaking visual inspections.